My name's Buitekant. I'm a councillor in Hackney Ward, which is in Hackney South. In Hackney, we face much the same problems as our neighbouring borough in Islington. I won't go too much into what the problems are, but I will say the Mayor, the Cabinet and the Council officers have done their best to keep the level of cuts in Hackney to as low as possible. However, so draconian are the cuts, there will be cuts, which will involve hundreds of voluntary redundancies, dozens of compulsory redundancies, and massive cuts to funding for voluntary groups. The good news from Hackney is that a small group of councillors will not be voting for the cuts at the council meeting. The not so good news is we still haven't decided whether we're going to abstain or we're going to vote against. But we have 2 weeks to go. We have 2 weeks to go, and we want to hear from people about what we should do. We really do need a maximum amount of pressure to be put on councillors, not only in Hackney but all over the country, to vote against the cuts. But there is a problem, and that is in Hackney and elsewhere, we aren't under a lot of pressure from the unions or other groups to vote against the cuts. For myself, for my ward, I haven't had, since last summer, I haven't had a single letter, email or phone call asking me to vote against the cuts. And I know from other councillors in Hackney it's the same, and I suspect it is a lot like that throughout the rest of the country. So I know I'm going to be brief. Some people will be disappointed that I can't give you an assurance that in Hackney some of us will vote against the cuts. But what I can give you an assurance is that if we're under a lot of pressure, the more chance there is that we will vote against the cuts.
Yeah, in Lewisham we've been involved in some quite militant action against cuts in our local council, really vicious cuts to our library services, to unemployment services, to children's services, all pushed through by Labour Council, really. So when they met up to vote on it, they didn't want to let us in the room to say what we thought about the vote. So we didn't want to accept that, so we stormed the town hall, we occupied the town hall. We had to adjourn their meeting for 2 hours, and in the end the police had to kick us out very brutally, and I think it was absolutely right for us in Lewisham to have done that, and I think that people should repeat that up and down the length and breadth of this country, because I think we should lay down a marker about what people are not prepared to accept in this country, whether it's in Whitehall or whether it's in the town hall. Now, at the same time, having said that, it is true also that we need to have a much bigger movement in this country, and that involves, for me, working with people in the Labour Party and working with Labour. We need the most massive movement that draws in as many people as possible, and that means seeking the widest possible unity, I think, working with people who don't always agree with you. And I think through the course of building a movement together, we can have the sorts of debates, the sorts of arguments that we're having today, reserving the right to take militant action and to oppose cuts where Labour are making them, but working with Labour as much as possible where we can, having those fierce debates in the process of building a united movement.
My name's Willie Black. I'm from the Right to Work in Edinburgh. On Thursday, the Edinburgh Council voted through a budget on massive cuts, along with Glasgow, Dundee and Aberdeen and all the other councils. So we've not had our 3 weeks in the run-up. But I'll have to tell you what Edinburgh Council did. There's a thing called blindcraft. You might know it in different names, but it's a factory where blind and disabled people make furniture, pine beds and other furniture. It has been in existence in various forums for 260 years. They are closing it in 30 days and making the workers there redundant. The question that I have to ask is, what is the unions prepared to do? Some people in unison, have put forward the following policy. It's an interesting policy. It is very nice. Disabled and blind people should be working alongside us. No. That's a good policy. No. But it's a useless policy to put right now. So on Monday morning, we are going to go down and we're going to speak to the workers there, and we're going to say that at this conference, these people who went to the conference on Saturday, the People's Convention, are saying to you, if you occupy your factory, we will be with you. You see, I spoke with a lot of other delegations to the council, and some people said, if you can work with us, well, we can maybe do this or maybe do that. I tell them in the uncertain times that their days are numbered. That is the tone that you have to take. You see, none of those councillors have organised one protest meeting, one demonstration, one thing that can back them up, so that when their weasel words, when they go out to meet people on the street, they say, it wasn't our fault, it was somebody else's fault. It was the big guy that did it to me, and that's why I had to do it. Well, it's their budget, it's their fault, and they will reap the consequences. We will light the flame that will burn them in the election coming, right? But we need to be mobilising with others all right across. I'll tell you what I think we need. We need for Len McCluskey, all the way down to that blind craft, to have 5 or 6 major issues that we all spit together and we can drown these bastards.
My name's Alex, I'm the branch secretary of the NUT in Town Hamlets, the most deprived borough in the country, and the borough that is getting the worst cuts, together with Hackney and Newham, 8.9% at the top of the tree. What I'm here to say today, I'm very pleased to tell you that both the NUT and Unison have now confirmed that we are balloting our members for strike action. 5,000 council workers balloting together for strike action that will happen before March the 26th if we win the ballots, of course. I think that will be the first council-wide action to happen, and I know that industrial confidence isn't high, but I think it's beginning to rise, because I think people are beginning to see what's happening, people are beginning to see the reality of the cuts. But in some places we know that unions are going into deals where they're selling terms and conditions in return for jobs, and I think that's a mistake, and it's a mistake that we have to challenge. We have to have our eyes on building a movement, building a mass movement, as Jess says. March the 26th isn't the end, it's the start, and I think what will set it apart from the war demonstration in 2003, which was the high watermark of the anti-war movement, is that March the 26th will take place against a rising tide of militancy and a rising tide of industrial action, because everything we hear is bigger than people expect. All the demonstrations and meetings that are happening should give us confidence. The last thing I want to say is this. It's not about what happens in the next 4 weeks. It's not about how people vote on budgets in the next 4 weeks. It's about the next 4 and 5 years, because this government is determined to break us. This is the first year of the cuts. So one thing I would like to see Labour councils and other councillors doing is trying to build that movement. Whatever you do in the council chamber, I've raised this in other places, why don't all the Labour leaders of London councils call a conference, have a press conference, issue a press statement opposing the cuts? Ray Mellon, the right-wing Mayor of Middlesbrough, has had a front-page spread in The Guardian attacking the cuts from the right. Liberal Democrat leaders of councils have issued a joint public statement condemning the cuts. We need to see the same from our representatives in the council. Whatever you do this year, there are more cuts coming next year, and the way to stop them is by working with us and building that movement and mobilising the biggest forces we can against these Tory cuts. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Retta Moore and I've come from Manchester today, from a very small third sector, voluntary sector organisation, human rights organisation called RAPA. Thinking back to the beginning of the revolution in Egypt, and one of the first things that I heard people talking about in Egypt was that they had lost their fear. One of the first things that people did in Egypt was let go of their fear. Now, I didn't know, actually, until it was explained, that actually you wouldn't go to jail if you were a councillor who opposed the cuts. I think that's an important part of the argument that we all should take forward now. Because the people who are representing us are people who will have to be pushed and shown that there is nothing to fear, because there's too many of us with our backs to the wall who have nowhere else to go. And it comes down to the organising principle. Yesterday there's a big party in the Revolutionary Square in the centre of Cairo that has organised itself. There's clinics, there's places where people can eat. Everything is organised by ordinary people on the ground who in their first moments let go of their fear. Let's take that as a very, very strong, very fundamental argument. It's a simple thing to do. We know what the detail is on the cuts in Manchester now. We know where every library and every swimming pool and every housing office and every CAB that's under threat exists. The people who use those places don't want them to go. The people who've been elected to represent the people in those places where the attacks are there, those are the people that they need to be made to listen to. And so we have to follow through. And the arguments that are coming forward around occupying factories is exactly right. Because what was one of the critical shifts in Egypt 2 days ago was the emergence of the trade union movement, the real site of power, of economic power. So we take that lesson as well. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Gary Heather, I'm the President of Islington Trade Union Council. I live in Islington. The issue I'd like to deal with is what Paul Brandon pointed out when he opened this conference, was that we need to build maximum unity, we need cooperation about having a movement against the cuts. Now, Charlene has explained the position that the Labour Council took in Islington. What I can tell you is that in Islington we have set up an organisation called Islington Hands Off Our Public Services. Last weekend we had 1,000 people on the march against the cuts. But there are 100,000 people that live in Islington. And comrades, that's the point. We've got to get a lot more people on the streets against the cuts. Now, Charlene explained about what the Labour Council's done for the cuts that are coming up this next financial year in Islington. But what about the cuts that are going to be coming up after that? And that's why, regardless of what you think about what they did in Islington, the key to our success is getting more and more and more people on the streets to oppose the cuts, so that those Labour councillors can see that it is not the will of the people, that it is not what should be done, and that they should make an effort to actually do even more to oppose cuts than they've done up to now. The other thing is that we haven't actually learned anything from all the struggles that have been in the past, in a sense, because if you actually start looking at the arcane local government law, it ties elected councils up in all sorts of knots that have been explained and forces them down the road to do that. That is the true revolutionary approach in this country, is to make sure that we sweep those away. And the other one is, if you haven't considered standing for the council, and there are a lot of elections coming up, not in London unfortunately in May, then consider doing it. Because the other thing is that if you want people to pursue progressive socialist policies on councils, you need to make sure that you get those people elected, and then we might have a better chance of opposing the cuts. We need to build maximum unity, and we need to encourage Labour councillors at the moment are not voting against cuts, that we need to build the movement to make sure that they're in a position to do that in the future. We need to make sure by doing that that we've got our comrades, actually in councils. Thanks.